Geocachomaniacs.
GeoGearHeads.
Welcome to episode 311 of the GeoGearHeads. This is Daryl W4 back as usual with Chris of the Northwest.
And you act like I'm usual. However, I'm almost always here. But
Well,
usual is something that I am not.
You're just not normal.
Those are both true. Normal.
You know what? That's not a place I should have gone. Never mind. Skip that.
Oh, Daryl, it's great to be with you every Thursday night right here on GeoGearHeads. You know, this is a weekly show about geocaching and geolocation games.
I do know that.
Are you sure? Okay.
But you know what? I might have forgotten. It's been another crazy week. So more like a crazy year at this point.
I'm right there with you. Tonight, though, we have a very special guest, a returning guest, and one of our most favorited guests. You think I can use the word guest a few more times? I think I can.
I don't know. I guessed you can.
Oh,
sorry. It was just sitting there. I had to do it.
I appreciate the pun. However, I would like to introduce our guest, Shermanator 18.
Hello again, fellas. How are you today?
Obviously,
we are
inflicting much pain on our listeners. And you have to sit here and listen to it firsthand.
I know. I should have declined, I think.
Probably. For
how you think about it?
Split my mind.
Might not know. Shermanator 18 is a longtime listener and supporter of the show. Plus, she's on that other show that I keep trying. You know, the worst part is I always mess up the title of Geocache Talk because I keep trying to shorten it to the old Australian podcast that I'm not going to mention because if I do, I'm going to get stuck on that name again.
That's right, Daryl.
A returning co-host on Geocache Talk. That's recorded every Sunday evening.
I just got to talk with her for 2 hours last week?
Oh yeah, that was a fun time.
Yeah, you didn't get to talk about Pokemon Go like you wanted to.
I know. I was so excited, and Gary's just not so excited about Pokemon Go. So
what? I got to hear a bit of it. I really wanted to go live. We were at PodCon 2017 right there in Seattle, and I did a speed test for my phone with cellular data, and I was getting just a little over 2 megs upload. And I thought, nope, there is no way I'm going live.
Mm-hmm. I'm sure lots of people were using the cell connection there.
Rude people, don't they know that we have to podcast? Oh, wait a minute. They were all podcasters. Exactly. Never mind.
Yeah. If you think connectivity is bad at normal events, wait till you go to an event for the media.
Oh, yes.
There's no connectivity. Well, tonight we're going to be talking about how tech changes caching and how tech has changed caching. And the last time we talked about this was years and years ago on show 84. So we're going to kind of get into this, but Team Aviju actually sent a big, long email. And I figure we'll use that to kind of kick it off, and then we'll go from there. So, Chris, I'm going to make you read this nasty thing.
And no, I'm not going to read it because Team Mavajuice was not kind to me in the chat.
So
Daryl W4 is the even one, and Chris of the Northwest is the odd one.
Okay, so maybe we should just skip it.
Skip it. Let's go on. And no, I'll be the bigger man. Wait.
You don't want to talk about that, do you?
No. Okay. Team Mavajuice sent an email. He starts off by saying, I've had a discussion a month ago with some friends at a meetup. There are 2 totally different stories here. Technology for caches and technology for caching. Technology for caches are generally about field puzzles. Software based on where I go or hardware based on the Arduino microcontroller or Raspberry Pi computer boards. With a sub $25 price for the Arduino or Raspberry Pi, you can do a lot and have fun at it. The Arduino supports an LCD screen and supports a large amount of cheap sensor boards like direction, altitude, temperature, and orientation, with some small hacks to combine the output on the LCD screen and the user interface of the sensors. You can easily make your own field puzzle. After listening to one of the earlier shows, I got an idea for a time trial over a water pipeline going through the area. At a certain point, it rises 50 meters over 200 meters. An Arduino with an altitude sensor, accurate to 30 centimeters, and an LCD screen were used to create this cache. You have 3 minutes to get to that height difference. It's doable time-wise, but your legs will feel like jelly about 2/3 of the way on the trip, and you'll need all your mental capacity to keep going. This particular cache is GC6W7AZ. That's GC6 Whiskey 7 Alpha Zulu. For the Raspberry Pi, I found out how to make a short range, about a 10-meter FM radio station, and use that to broadcast the final location for a cache related to an obscure military radio listening post. Oh, that's really cool. He puts a link in here from a magazine on how to make your Raspberry Pi radio. This geocache is GC751 Hotel Victor. While both of these technologies are hardware-based, there are software-based field puzzles based on Where I Go. Where I Go is a nightmare. If you check the Where I Go website of Groundspeak, you still see they talk about Pocket PC, a technology dropped in 2007. The Where I Go cartridges are based on the Lua, that's L-U-A programming language. Version 5.1, last release of that version was in 2012. The cartridges are not Lua source code. They are compiled into a Lua bit code. Lua bit code has two problems. It's stuck to that particular Lua version, 5.1 in this case, and stuck to that architecture, 32-bit in this case. The 64-bit Lua interpreter cannot load the 32-bit Lua cartridges. And without some patches floating on the internet, you won't be able to build a 32-bit Lua interpreter on a 64-bit operating system like iOS. Furthermore, there's no public specification for the Where I Go API, and there's no test suite implementation to test your Where I Go library and Where I Go environment. Other software based field puzzles are impossible to get published at Groundspeak listening service. I've had the idea of an augmented reality based field puzzle for the iPhone, iPad, iPad, and got them rejected on the basis that it wasn't possible for non-iPhone users to solve this puzzle. They insist that the software for the puzzle needs to be available to both Android and iPhone. Considering that they allow caches based on chirp technology, a Garmin-specific technology, and NFC, only readable by Android phones, or allow caches to be accessible only if you have scuba gear or water vehicles, it's disappointing to see this double standard. As an amateur hacker, I will not be able to provide this software for both platforms. While so far I've not met anybody who doesn't have access to both platforms via family and friends. Technology for caching is totally a different story. You have two different platforms, dumb GNSS receivers and programs running on smart mobile computers, aka smartphones. They both use the various GNS networks to obtain their location, but the capabilities are so different, it's not funny. The dumb GNSS receivers haven't changed their technology since 2001. They obtain their caching-related data in the GPX format via USB cable attached to a computer. This GPX format is ancient and stuck in the past. Various attempts in the past to improve it or extend it have failed because of its incompatibilities in the behavior of parsers for this format, so that nobody dares touch it anymore. you are stuck with the maps provided for your platform. You are stuck with the software running on it. And if you're not connected to the USB cable, the only way to update the caching data on it is via the horrible UI method. It's the end of the line for this. You won't get anything better than what you had in 2005. The smart computers have it better. They don't need a cable to communicate. Their apps are not limited to the GPX format, and they can get their data via an API controlled by the listing service. The data they get is richer than the GPX files. Its data fields are extendable so that any changes to the data format can be dealt with by the apps without needing an update in the software. Do you want a new cache type on the listing service? Just define it. The apps will pick it up and its metadata, name, icon, logging capabilities, etc. Apps are not limited to one map provider, and you can switch between whatever you'd like, Google Maps or your ESRI height map or your Mapbox cycling map and your OpenStreetMap to find out the paths in the park. You can quickly exchange data towards your friends who walk next to you, either via a peer-to-peer protocol or an internet-based service. If you don't like the app you're using now, you can use others. There's no reason to only use that single app just because their marketing team has labeled it the official app. You can talk to the developers to get issues fixed, and some apps are open source, so if you're keen and capable, you can solve the problem yourself. So, to quickly repeat, hardware-based field puzzles have evolved, and if you are keen, you can make something cool for a relatively little money. Software-based field puzzles, you're either stuck with 2005 technology or they're not allowed. For caching, you're either stuck with the 2005 technology of cables, data formats, and user interface, or you're using this year's technologies and capabilities with the app which fits your personality. And that comes from Team Maviju. Thank you, Team Maviju.
Yeah, big long email there, but
hold on, I'm going to take a breath.
There's a couple of things. One that I noticed, he's saying that Where I Goes are the only software-based puzzles that are approved, and you can check out Intercache, which is web-based. There's a lot of those out there now. Click a Clue is a cross-platform app, which we have a few of those around here, and I've heard of a couple of others here and there. So there's other ones out there, but if you're trying to develop something yourself for cache, unless it's web-based, chances are you're not going to get it approved. And even the web-based stuff tends to be a little bit tricky because they're afraid of malware. Which is a valid concern.
Yeah, it is. Though Android and iOS browsers are pretty isolated, and unless you go to a specifically malicious website, which you can put in anywhere in your description, you're going to be safe. So
yeah, it's not unfounded, but I think it's overblown, if that makes sense. And then the other thing with the GPS technologies, the receivers, they've changed a lot since 2001. The technology really kind of took a leap about, what was it, 2004 or 5? No, it was after that, I think, when we started seeing the paperless caching with the Garmin's. But that's when it kind of died. I shouldn't say died, but kind of stagnated, was when they came out with like the Colorado, which was the first that had the paperless caching. And they've made various improvements, but it's kind of slowed down. We've seen them try to do some of the connectivity with a smartphone with the new 750 series. But at this point, Garmin is the only one still manufacturing units and still creating new ones. They have no competition, yet they still have such a limited market. I don't think there's much incentive for them to spend the money. So I think really what's happening there is there's just not enough people out there willing to spend the money on a GPSR to make it worth their time.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's true. And I think we see in the latest Garmin's, the 700s, their step forward to say, okay, you know what? We've got to start using a smartphone or some sort of smartphone integration, or we're going to become irrelevant.
Right. Well, and they did try with the what was it? The Montera was the
Uh,
Android based one.
there was a
Yeah, the Montera. There was a
Android
Montana.
version of or
The
Android.
Montana was the one that was based on the same
Yeah,
software as the rest of their products, but the
Montera.
Montera was the one that was Android based,
Hmm.
and that one was not a good unit in so many ways. But they tried it and it failed, and I think it's one of those situations where they wanted to give it a shot. It didn't work the way they expected. The reception wasn't good. So let's go back to the stuff we know how to work with and produce a good, stable product. Yeah, I guess good and stable are kind of relative there, but it's the
It's where horses sleep.
it's yeah we have to produce what we know how to produce that we can do efficiently, and that's not going to get you a good product. If you just try to iterate on what you have, and they do take some time to fix what they have, but it always seems whenever I have a Garmin unit, there's these nagging little bugs that almost never seem to go away unless you get the next version of that product. Like the eTrex 30 I've got is really solid. That thing has not given me an ounce of trouble. But some of the earlier eTrexes, ooh, that's a bad word. The earlier eTrex units had their issues, and I've heard some problems with the 35, I think it was, but the touchscreen ones, people haven't really liked those. In general, Garmin has not had really good luck with a good touchscreen interface for their GPSRs.
Hmm. I'm shocked that Garmin went to all the expense to make an Android version of their product and never carried that out into a standalone product. They could sell that app, the Garmin interface, for Android phones, and I'm sure they could port it over to iOS easily enough. But
Well, it
they
wasn't
never went
really,
anywhere with that.
yeah, it really wasn't that big a thing. They had a bunch of apps in their own launcher. It really wasn't. It was really an Android with just a bunch of Garmin apps, and some of those apps had been available. But a lot of it, I think, was that they were trying to do their own maps and everything. But it also did, as I understand, come from their phones. Remember, they tried that Nuvi phone for a while,
Oh, yes, they did.
and that had its own interface. And what they found was people really didn't like it very much.
It was. I think it was better than the Montera.
Yes, I think from what I hadn't actually gotten my hands on it,
Mhm.
but from the videos and such that I saw, yes, it was definitely better than the Montera was. However, they had I can't remember what it was called. Remember, Garmin had their Street Nav unit or software that was available on Android and iOS after it they came out with phones. It was called like Street. It wasn't Street Maps, but it was something like that, I think.
Street
And,
cred.
yeah,
Oh no, that's a different thing. They never had
and
that.
it was really bad. It was nowhere near as good as the Nuvies were, even the most basic Nuvies. So they had the app for the Nuvi phones, and originally the Nuvi phones were Windows Mobile. At the time they started on it, it was Pocket PC, and that was rebranded Windows Mobile. And then they had Android that came out later. So they had the two different versions of the phone that they were working on. Uh, both were manufactured by Asus Tech, as I recall, and it was a partnership with them. So they weren't even controlling all of the software, if I remember correctly. But they did port the navigation software off the phone onto Android and iOS later on, and it still didn't do well. They ended up buying Navigon because Navigon was doing a far better job.
Mm-hmm.
All this talk is quite foreign to me because when I started caching, there's already smartphones, and so I just started with an app, and so I never had,
Well,
I
this
never
is
had to print out the paper and hand type in coordinates and all that. So it's kind of just, it is how it is for me. There's no way back when in my book.
Well, this is one of the best things, and one of the reasons why we wanted you on is because you are one of these newer cachers that came in from smartphone caching, and now there is almost no barrier to get into geocaching. If you want to try caching, you go out, you download a free app, give it a shot. If you like it, then you probably get into something a little bit better. But it's done on the smartphone that chances are you already have.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't have to go out and buy a GPSR. Now, Chris, you like to tell the story about Wits End in his first caching device. You want to refresh anyone who doesn't recall what that was?
Oh, sit down by the fire, kids. Let Grandpa Chris tell you a story. Yes, Wits End. Wits End is a hacker. That's all I can say. He will make things work, and you just look at it and you go, "That's genius." He got what we called at the time a hockey puck GPS receiver. It was a USB GPS receiver. No, I'm sorry, it was a serial GPS receiver that would plug into a laptop, and he found a way to hack that into a Pocket PC. So he could use a map program on the Pocket PC, update it with the information from the hockey puck GPS receiver, and all this fit into a VCR case, and out we went caching. And
Insane.
and it
That's
worked
hilarious.
well. It really did. The only issue was the hockey puck GPS receiver had to be powered all the time, and it was designed to run off the car. So we had to come up with a way to switch it between car and batteries. And we did that effectively. So there you go.
And
And
that
in
was what,
fact,
like
just
2003 or 4?
yep, yep. We found. I want to say he found together. I think we found our first 50 caches with that.
That's insane.
And just to make it a little more quirky, I didn't throw this in there, but it wasn't just a VHS case. It was a beta case for
Nice.
beta tapes.
Beta Cam or Beta Max?
Beta Max.
Okay, so the tiny one.
No. What was the bigger one?
Beta Cam was is a commercial one. That's the one that has the bigger cases.
Well, you had
for the tape.
for the
Not for
tape,
the
yeah.
Yeah.
It competed directly with VHS. You had VHS and beta.
Yeah, that was Beta Max. Yeah.
Beta Max. Okay. That's
Yeah,
what I
a little
thought,
bit
but I couldn't
smaller.
remember.
Anyway, yeah, in 2005 when I got started, typically you went out and you bought the GPSR and you had to figure out how to get the caches onto it. Typically, people were just hand entering the coordinates. They would print up the cache pages and take that out.
Mm-hmm.
Later on, like not that much later, people really started getting into the paperless caching. Yeah, and to give you an idea of how bad it was actually typically faster for me to hand enter the chords than to connect it to the serial interface and do the download and upload and all that from the website, because you'd have to go and download the cache. And typically, yeah, you did the pocket queries, which would be delivered to your email, but you have to still download that. You have to bring it in. But with a serial interface, doing 10 caches into your GPSR, you still had to go and transpose that with something because the GPSRs didn't handle as much data per waypoint as they do now. You had like maybe 8 characters as your waypoint name.
No, my early Garmin eTrex Legend
Uh-huh.
would handle, I want to say 24 characters. So
was that for the waypoint name or for
Yes.
the description?
No, waypoint name.
Okay, because there was a description as well.
So Shermanator, you'll like this. I would print out cache pages, put them in a notebook. And then I would take those GPX files, put them into GSAC. And through GSAC, we could do a little manipulation, shall we say, and come up with and put a couple of characters before the cache name that would tell me the difficulty and terrain rating and the size of it. So
And this is where GSAC really started to become popular, because you
Right.
could fit so much information in, and most of the time you didn't have to carry around those printed stacks of paper.
exactly.
My goodness.
Yeah, but
This just blows my mind.
Just loading those into the through the serial interface into the GPSR. I want to say it took me anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes to load in 50 on the old Magellan Sport Track that I had.
Oh yeah, I mean it was a commitment. You know, you're not just gonna, hey, hold on, let me swing by, load these up, and go on my way. No, it was a commitment to load your GPS for the day. Okay,
Wow.
so and it would only hold, what was it, 100 caches? Is that
It
right?
depends on which one it was. The Venture, I think it was more than that. I think it was 500.
Was it 500? Because
I might be wrong, but I want to say it was 500.
so I mean, you had to know where you were going for the day. You just couldn't pick up and go and say, hey, I'm going to go over here.
Well, and you couldn't load in the waypoints too, and in those early units, they came up with some software updates later that would allow you to actually open and close the treasure chest icon, which is what you use for caches, to tell if you found it or not. But originally, the way that I would do the founds is I'd go in and delete that waypoint. So I mark it on my piece of paper, and then I delete the waypoint. Then later on, with some of the newer, better versions of that software, you got the ability to actually open and close the little treasure chest, and eventually there was a calendar that would list out each of those caches that you found on screen. But there's no way to get that off the unit. Then with the Explorist, what was it? The 2, 3, and 500 from Magellan, they actually had some software and icons with a little bit of a description that would load in. It would take like the first 150 characters or whatever that was. It would give you the icons, but the original ones wouldn't let you mark them found. That was a software update later. Venture HC held 500 caches, so that was a later version. You might be right that the original Venture did 100.
Well, I found it on the Garmin website. It had 8 megs of memory, not gigs, 8 megs of memory. It would hold 1,000 waypoints.
Well,
but
that didn't even have the
probably
card.
Related to about 250 caches.
But that didn't even have the card, so you can't expand it.
Yeah.
See, I hear all this, and I'm surprised that people have stuck with it. Like, I would have given up if I had to do that. This is not worth it if I have to print out the paper and hand punch in the coordinates. Is it really that fun if you have to do all that work?
Okay, here's something to consider. We're talking about how tech changes caching. This is back when
that's just what it was at the time.
So few caches out there. Well, and you didn't have a smartphone. That just wasn't a thing. You had, I guess by that point we did have, we had the Palm Pre and that kind of stuff. But it wasn't something that you really, the handsprings, the Blackberries, but it wasn't something that you'd really use very much except for work, because among other things, they were really expensive. But when we had this was, those caches that were in really cool places, or better thought out than just an LPC. But when you had the LPC, it was rare and it was cool.
Yes, there was a day. Wait, these things lift up?
Yeah, well, and not just that, but you had the magnetic electrical plates that were fairly popular at that point too. So it was just one of those, ooh, I'm in the parking lot. I'm in the parking lot. And that was half the fun of it, was you're not out in BFE doing it. You're like right next to home. You know, you can go and grab lunch right there. So I think when the technology became more accessible, we started to see more people get interested, more people want to hide the caches. But because you didn't have to put all of this effort in, maybe that also took away from the hides. I think it was probably more just people wanted to hide more, and there was a certain immediacy. Oh, I found a good spot. I have to list it now. That happened around 2008, I would say, in this area.
Well, and a power cache day back then could be 20 caches.
Oh, wow. I know. Well,
that was a lot.
I was super excited when we did, I want to say like 20 caches in an afternoon on a linear trail system that follows a river. That was quite the accomplishment. But again, by that point, we were no longer paper caching. We had upgraded to the Moby Reader. It's a premium member. You got pocket queries and a Moby Reader of that pocket query. So it's a book. You can search, you can make notes and all that kind of thing. It made it really nice to go caching.
But you still had two devices. You had your pocket PC and you had your...
Yes. Absolutely. Which is probably part of the reason why I still like having two devices, even though I really still cache with one now. But you go out with these two different devices. You've got the book over here. You've got the GPS over here. And you got all of the information that way. When you get back to the computer, you still didn't have a way to transfer that nicely. It was, okay, here I'm logging this cache. I'm logging this cache, going through your notes. But you put the notes with the cache, at least. And then even before that, there was, I can't remember what the Windows version was for the Windows mobile devices, but there was CacheMate, which eventually got ported to Windows as well. But CacheMate for the Palm devices would take that GPX file. So the same GPX file that you're loading to the GPSR would work in CacheMate, though I think you had to go through a converter. Do you remember, Chris?
I didn't use CacheMate. I had a Dell Axum, which was a pocket PC.
Right.
So out of GSEC, I would produce an HTML file and open that in the browser. Then I could do an HTML. I could look at the, cache number, click it, and go where I wanted to go.
Yeah. So, we had all of these workarounds. And then we got the Colorado, which allowed us to do paperless caching right on the device. And it introduced field notes. This is, again, pre-smartphones. But we should also note that there was a day when wap.geocaching.com, wap.geocaching.com, was available for your dumb phones, for your feature phones. So you'd bring up the WAP interface, put in, I think it did location searches, but you had to do it by like the address or zip code. That didn't have the ability to do location yet. Even though the GPS was built in, it didn't share it with the restricted web browser. Do you remember what WAP actually stood for? It's like Web Accessibility Protocol or something like that, I think.
Or yeah, something to that extent, yeah. And I remember something you could text in as well.
Yeah, cord.info was also...
that's how cord.info started, right?
Yeah. So there was a texting through cord.info would get you some information. But you could actually log caches and travelers through the WAP interface, which is just essentially a stripped-down web page. So you did have a way to do the live the live connections, and I would do that frequently when I was picking up, dropping travelers, or if it was an FTF, so that people would know. But otherwise, I did everything after the fact. And the Colorado gave me a way to mark those caches found with a couple of notes through the field notes, where I could just upload that to geocaching.com and it changed the way that I was caching for a little while. And then I went back because that was such a hard unit to use. Sydney, have you even seen a Colorado?
I know people who have had them, but I don't think I've never used one. Like you guys are talking about all this stuff like PDAs and pocket PCs, and I'm just, I guess, too young for that. Like I don't remember any of that stuff.
Well, 2007 is when the iPhone came out. And that's not when it changed, because it did have a GPSR. But we kind of saw the writing on the wall. People were using the Google Maps in there. And one of the big things back then was, what happens if I've left my GPSR at home and there's a new cache that publishes near work? How am I going to find it? Do you remember this, Chris?
Mm-hmm.
What did you do? Oh, John in the chat says it was a wireless application protocol was what WAP stood for.
I've done a couple of things. I would open the cache page, get the coordinates, take those coordinates and paste them into Google Maps.
Even before Google Maps, I was using MapQuest.
MapQuest.
Yeah, they also did that.
There was another one. We were downloading tiles directly.
The Terra servers from Microsoft.
Yeah, but it was using that and it had a different interface. Anyway.
Okay.
So I would take that and overlay it there, and I was like, okay, I think it's near this picnic table. I can go get it. And so I would go out without a GPSR, and just start looking at ground zero until I found it.
And that to me was some of the best geocaching I've ever done.
Mm-hmm.
It was so much fun to try to do it off of these printed sheets. And you're printing off the laser printer at work, so it's black and white, low resolution because it's trying to print a grayscale image, and trying to find a cache off of that. So that was just fun. But they were doing the same kind of thing with their phones. Okay, I can pull up the Google map on the phone and it's going to put the pin here. I don't know where I am because it's only going to show me where the Wi-Fi access point is, because they didn't have the GPS in the original iPhone. But they were doing the same thing and they were loving it. So when the 3G came out, everyone got all excited, and that's when we started getting the apps that would do geocaching. And I don't think it was even a year before it just exploded, and we started seeing a lot more cachers, because all of a sudden now you could easily get into it. And a lot of people found geocaching because they were looking for stuff to do with that new, very expensive phone that they bought.
Which is funny because I got a smartphone. I guess my first one must have been in college. But I didn't find geocaching until like quite a few years after that. So I must not have been looking for cool things to do with my new fancy phone.
Well, if you're in college, you probably have other things to do with your time.
Right. Yep, that's true.
So it's changed a lot. And that was one of those inflection points, was, right around 2008, 2009 is when the GPSR started to die out in caching, because so many people came into it with the smartphones. Now, even at that point, the smartphones still sucked for location. They have gotten so much better, and we've gotten so much better at using them too. So people were going out and buying a GPS once they finally got into caching. And you saw some of these lighter weight units, some of the E-Trex and the Magellan Explorers GC got way more popular. Not because they were cheap, but because it was smaller and lighter, that they could carry it around. And the fact that it was cheap didn't hurt either. But we saw, I think, more capabilities added to the E-Trex after that, because Garmin realized that the E-Trex had a future for a second device. For the people who weren't looking for that serious hunting or hiking unit, the E-Trex was a good solution. So, okay, we can sell more if we put more time and effort into it, and hence we got the 10, 20, and 30, and now the X's and the 10 or the 15, 25, and the 30s, 35s.
Yeah, that also crossed my mind. Like, if it wasn't for people that go geocaching, how many people would buy these GPS units?
Well, and that's the thing that we saw pre-smartphone was people were buying GPSRs just to have them. Not
like,
really
I have the one that goes
was.
in your car, but I mean, that's like junk now. Like, I haven't even touched it in years.
Yeah, that whole market has seen a huge decline, much as hiking and stuff it has. But my understanding, and no one seems to be giving good numbers on this, but my understanding is that the sat nav units, as they tend to call them in Europe, which are your car GPS units, have plummeted dramatically. One, you've got a lot of cars that include that as part of their head unit now. But two, anyone who isn't doing that is doing it through the smartphone anyway.
Right.
So, they pretty much don't sell anywhere close to the units they used to. It was huge decline. And we've seen a decline in the outdoor units because we've lost those casual users. But we still have the avid hikers who buy the GPSRs and geocachers and hunters who buy them because they are durable units. So that is a market that isn't going to die right now.
It still feels like very few people in comparison to the entire population.
Absolutely. But the drop has not been, in percentages, the drop has not been as significant. Now, this is a part that I want to know. Are we looking at as many of these sat nav units being sold as we are for the outdoor units? Because you still see the sat nav units in all of the big box stores and discounters, and they're still being produced. They're still selling. Yeah, and I'm thinking we don't have the high end of that market. It's probably the low end market that's survived because it's the, hey, we're going to get a GPS for our aunt on their birthday, or she's going to travel, let's get her something. That kind of user at this point is pretty much all they have. You don't have the, hey, I'm doing road trips for work every week. I need something that's going to organize that and give me the best route. Those pretty much don't exist that I've been able to find recently.
No. And, okay, so I know many geocachers that still have the car navigation unit, and they load GPX files into it so you can navigate from cache to cache. And that's very practical. Now, that's also good in areas where you don't have data, or crossing international borders where data is going to cost a big pile of cash.
Though that's been changing too. AT&T just dropped their roaming or international roaming rates. And then T-Mobile, I think, actually is going to start charging for some of it. But, T-Mobile has been doing the free lower speed international roaming. And there's a bunch of European carriers that have done similar things. Though roaming in EU on an EU carrier is supposed to be free. I think there was some hang up. I was just reading about that. And who knows what's going to happen with Brexit too. But one of the conversations I had about a week ago was with someone talking about routing. They're an iPhone user as well. They also love Cachly, and they complained about the routing. And I was telling them the thing that I have done for years and continue to do is use Navigon. And one of the reasons I like Navigon is because it does allow for the multiple stops. But with Cachly and most of the other iOS apps, all you have to do is hit that in Cachly, it's navigate and then hit the share. But there's a share to a mapping app. You pick Navigon and it just opens up Navigon and I can add it to my list. So I can create these big long lists. And Chris, when we went to Geo Woodstock in St. Louis, we had that big list going. I think wasn't I using the iPad in the car for like a secondary screen?
You had the iPad in the car for a spreadsheet because we were supposed to get to certain stops at certain times in order to schedule.
Yeah.
And
yeah, lots of planning for that trip.
Terminator, you laugh, but bathroom breaks were not allowed.
No time.
Bathroom breaks were allowed if
there's no time.
Yeah.
Look at the schedule.
Exactly. We are 30 seconds behind. We've got to go. Yes, I've got to go. Daryl, I've got to go.
Well, we had the primary and the secondary targets. So if we were running behind the secondary targets, the caches that were like the second or third in the state got knocked out. So that we did have to knock out like the last several, but we hit, I think, almost all of those.
I think we did.
I think we did. One of the things.
No, it was fun. I'm jesting in the fact that we couldn't stop anywhere, but you know, a plan like that, I have no problem with. Is, you know, here's what if we want to get to our goal on time, then you know, these are the times. And
yeah,
we took too long finding that one, so we've got to make that up. We've got to take one out somewhere.
Yeah, we had an event that we had to make it to at a certain time. Mm-hmm. So, you know, everything was mapped out, everything was in Navigon. But one of the things that I have done on trips like that before is, especially if you have two users of Navigon in the car, you have your navigator person who's going through and updating the list. You can send it from one phone to another by email, by text, whatever, and update that list. So the driver just follows what someone else has already done, and someone else can be in there making those changes. We don't have many apps like that. Navigon's not a cheap app. It doesn't do very well on Android. It works well on iOS, but for some reason the Android app it really bothers me. And I've talked with some of the other people who have used it on Android, and they're like, yeah, it's a powerful app, but it just sucks. So, you know, they go back to using Google Maps, which is limited to like 4 or 5 stops. You can't do these big long.
You know, I think that used to be the case.
I never even do it that way.
How do you do it?
I just navigate to one cache at a time.
Okay.
Well, and that's what most people I know do. In part, if you're doing skip these routes or skip these steps, you're going to have to go in and remove them from your list. So you pre-plan, you go out, and you're just go from cache to cache, or, you know, cache to hotel or whatever, you know, whichever your stops are, you just do it like point to point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would just like make a bookmark list, and then Cachely can open that, and you can see it on the map, and then I just click on whatever cache is next and hit navigate and go to, you know, Waze or Google Maps or Apple Maps, whatever. And then when I find that one, I go back to Cachely and pick the next one.
All right. So my theory is we're going to see a continuing reduction in the number of people caching with GPSRs. We're going to see better accuracy on the smartphones to the point where, as I understand it, some of the new chipsets that are coming out are smartphone chipsets that have this L5 signal reception. And we're not seeing that yet coming to dedicated GNSS chips aside from the higher end ones. So like your Garmin handhelds aren't likely to see the L5 where before the smartphone that you have does. So that really accurate signal is going to be on your smartphone, not on your GPSR. So people are even that much less likely to use a GPSR. And, you know, when you start getting the higher accuracy signals, we're probably going to see some improved accuracy in the cache placement. And we're going to have a hard time fighting off this impression that people have come to accept as fact that the smartphone is less accurate at hiding caches.
I don't think that's true, even these days. I think they're pretty much equal.
Well,
I guess that's my opinion.
The problem was back in the day we had people hiding, new cachers, and we still have this problem now. But it was anytime anyone saw a smartphone hidden cache, it was from a newer user who didn't understand. We had the problem even before that with like the eTrex users, and it wasn't just eTrex, but the eTrex users around here were really notorious for, oh, I want to go hide a cache. Oh, this is a great spot. Let me turn on my GPS and mark that point. No. You have to let it settle. You have to, there's a process of getting good coordinates that we had to learn as GPS users. And smartphone users tended not to do that. And now, you have to have that app open so that the location is running. It gets its fix and refines it. If you don't, you're going to get bad coordinates. It doesn't matter what the device is.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how it got that bad rep. It continues to have that bad rep because we still see some people who just do the, fire up Google Maps, mark the point, and let's go home.
Exactly.
And if you're doing like Google Maps, you're not going to get a good location anyway because it's a car nav app more than it is a geocaching app.
It's more of a user knowledge problem rather than a GPS or smartphone accuracy problem.
Right. Yeah. It's a user issue more than it is a hardware issue, but it's a community issue in that we have to teach each other how to use this technology and take full advantage of it. So that's my theories on where we're going to go is basically more smartphones and GPSRs, and we've gone a really long time talking about this stuff, much longer than I wanted to. And we haven't talked at all about the caches or trends and location stuff. So, Sydney, I know you kind of wanted to talk a little bit about the caches. Why don't we do that?
Sure. Well, I think Team Mavage talked a little bit about there's a whole influx of Arduino and smart caches lately, and I think that's like a really recent development, at least in my area. But there's all these creative things that you can do with that kind of stuff. Like WV Tim has a whole set of caches that use the Arduino, and I think that's just a big change for the better, in my opinion.
Yeah, and this isn't like new that people are putting technology into their caches. I remember a cache about 2009-ish where someone took one of their old routers and set it up with just the SSID being the coordinates for the final cache. So you had to drive to their house, fire up a Wi-Fi device, and look for the coordinates.
Oh boy.
It was awesome back then. But, people are just going to take whatever they can and do it. And I'm really looking forward to what we're going to find in the future with all of these Internet of Things devices starting to actually come out. Granted, most of them right now aren't really the kind of stuff that you could put on a cache. But how exciting is it going to be when you get a connected cache, a cache that can actually interact over the internet? You tell the cache owner, hey, someone has found, has opened this treasure box. You can start getting into some cool stuff with that level of connectivity. So I'm really excited about that.
One that comes to mind is I think Geocaching Blogger did one where you have to play the Simon game in order to get the cache to open. And that is just like, whoa, like that's crazy.
Yeah, there's a few of those that I've seen.
There's one in the area here that I've done. It's amazing.
Well, and the nice thing with Arduino is it is a popular enough system at this point. You can find the plans, you can find the software, and if you know what you're doing, you can tweak it pretty easily. If you don't know what you're doing, it isn't that hard to do, as I understand. Now, Sydney, I assume you haven't had a chance to play with Arduino at all.
I actually bought one, but have not even sat down to mess around with it.
kind of like my 3D printer. I haven't.
I know. Yeah, mine too.
That one.
Yeah.
And Chris, I know that you played with it a little bit, but
yes.
How much is a little bit?
Very little. I don't have one of my own, so I have, borrowed others, and it's one of those things that the more I get into it, the easier it comes, but I don't get into it, so there's that barrier to entry that I was like, okay, I've got to get in the right mindset. Now I'm ready to go, and off I go. But I get started and I'm like, okay, now what am I going to do with it? I have to come up with a plan or a goal in mind. It's just, just to go out and fiddle with one. I lose interest pretty quick.
Exactly. I haven't had that cool creative idea yet, so I kind of pushed that to the side until I have something that I really want to try.
All right, here's a question. Do you think that all of this flexibility and all these options are actually hindering the ability to place a cache? You have too many choices that you can't make a decision, so you don't place a cache.
I could see that, yeah.
I think maybe it's that, I guess, here's one opinion, is that you want to do something that, that's cool and innovative and, hasn't been done in your area, or you want to be different from whoever. But there's so many different things out there that coming up with something new is hard now that there's so much different things you can do with geocaches.
Yeah, I'm just thinking part of the problem might be that we have so much versatility in our cache technologies, our actual physical cache technologies now. And we've had a lot of mechanical technology before, but now we have mechanical and this electronic technology that you kind of get crippled and you want to do all of this cool stuff, and making it work might be the problem. Just getting it finalized in your planning is a problem. And I wonder if that might be why we don't see more better caches, especially when someone's going around placing these lesser caches so much more quickly that your spot that you planned on putting it gets stolen.
I can see that happening in some areas.
I know a lot of people who do this kind of stuff, with a planning for really good caches, that will place a really crappy hide
just to get the spot.
Just to lock the spot and give someone something to do. So when they actually publish the good cache, people know right where it is because it's the same spot that they had a different container before, but now it's going to be a good cache. And then you also wanted to mention 3D printed caches, which we'll talk about in a little over a month again, too.
That's right.
But I'm excited for some of the new technologies coming to 3D printing, too. For at least the last year, they've been talking about electronic circuits that are 3D printed.
What?
And now there's some, it's not that tough if you have the two extruders to conceive of putting something in there. But most of the 3D printed electronic stuff right now, it's you put a little board in, or run the wires through while it's printing. So it's kind of like meh. But one of the interesting things that they were talking about on Daily Tech News last week was a mechanical 3D printed option to replace electronic circuits. So for things like a valve to measure, or a sensor to measure flow rates, they can 3D print this mechanical apparatus, which then reads out somehow on an electronic device. So I'm thinking it's something like a proximity sensor instead of being, a electronic sensor, inside. But it's like, wow, just think how cool it would be if we can actually get into these really, really fine, precise mechanical systems that are 3D printed. How cool is that going to be? I'm not talking, making an electronic cache anymore, but just a really intricate 3D printed mechanical cache, because we've seen all kinds of stuff 3D printed that can't be created really any other way, including some of these weird gear art kind of situations.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of cache could we create that's not able to be created aside from 3D printing?
Well, Daryl, you'd have to have your printer working to do that.
Yeah, and I have to be a lot better at CAD. I'm not CAD. All right. Do you guys have any thoughts on what we might see in caches with technology improvements?
I think you kind of said it, Daryl, that we're going to get more. Smartphones are getting more accurate, less people using GPSRs, and more of these, I guess what you would call smart gadget caches, I think, are on the horizon.
Okay.
Definitely.
I want to get out of caching and into some location in general stuff in a minute. But do you think we're going to see caches actually interacting with phones, with smartphones? Or do you think that's going to be a little too scary from security aspect that people aren't going to want to try it?
Yeah, I think that is a big concern these days. I don't know. It would also, that would be a hard barrier to cross, I think.
Well, and I think that's why USB dead drops, the memory stick dead drops never took off.
Oh, yeah, I think you're 100% correct.
It's just too scary to say I'm going to take this USB stick, stick it in my computer, and pray there's not a virus on it.
See, and I'm thinking with infrastructure mode on like a Raspberry Pi Wi-Fi, I've seen people do like little web servers and stuff where it's actually using that to control something. Mm-hmm. So what if instead of having the cache that you have to do your normal puzzle, you have a web page and you have to do something with the web page, and then it's going to interact with a cache. And
you mean like inner cache?
No, not like inner cache.
Oh, I got you. Then it's going to do something to the cache. Gotcha.
Right. So
open it.
Yeah, you could even probably do it with Arduino, but
that's very Internet of Things.
Yeah, exactly. And because you'd have to Wi-Fi connect to it. Mm-hmm. And I worry that people are going to see that as a security risk, just like they do with some of the other stuff. But it's not anywhere close to as risky as plugging into a USB. So maybe. Mm-hmm. Anyways, on the location stuff in general, do you guys have any observations as to what looks like is going to be happening in this next year? Because we are at the end of the year. We want to take a look forward into 2018 and kind of get a feel for what we think is going to happen.
I think more AR games are going to come out.
Okay. That's kind of the obvious one that we all expected, because iOS and Android both have the new AR APIs out. And that's what I had thought until about a week ago. Chris?
For a while, we've been hearing about this indoor GPS, GPS signals that can penetrate indoors and get you right to the, exact store in the mall you're looking for.
The aisle with your cereal.
Yeah, there you go.
I've always wanted that.
Find me the Cocoa Puffs. Where are the Cocoa Puffs?
Here. Right, like you're in Home Depot or whatever, and you need to know where the computer chairs are.
Now, Home Depot actually has a really good app, and it knows what store you're in, and it says, "Oh, those are on aisle 13."
That's amazing.
Yeah,
it won't take you there, but it knows what store you're in and what aisle they're on.
So, yeah, and there have been companies trying that with the iBeacons. Yes. So that if you're in their app, it tells you, go over here. But there's a lot of stores that have done it's in aisle 11 on the third shelf kind of stuff, which is so nice. So I do like that. But I'm not sure we're going to see much in the way of like games happening on the indoor front, just because unless it's done by the property owner, you don't really want to mess around with the liabilities of taking people inside to play a game. Like even Pokemon Go, a lot of malls have banned Pokemon Go.
Can you?
Sure, if you're in a mall.
You're going to walk around with a smartphone.
Yeah, it's well, the question is, are you going to misbehave?
Well, I misbehave without a smartphone.
Yeah, and have a large congregation of people blocking entrances, which is how Pokemon Go got that bad reputation, is people acting badly.
Which are all the paparazzi following me. The paparazzi just follow me like so. That happens to me all the time, Daryl.
That famous, huh? I guess I've never gone anywhere with Chris, so I haven't had that experience yet.
Exactly. If you did, you'd understand what I go through every day. And then you go, Chris, I don't know how you do it.
So my prediction on the trend for 2018.
And Daryl just goes on. Thanks, Daryl.
But my prediction for the trend of 2018 did change a little over a week ago. And a lot of it comes from, we seem to already be getting this AR fatigue. We have a lot of bad AR stuff that's coming out. A lot of people who really don't understand it, and they're just kind of tuning out because people have been talking about it so much. But what I've noticed just in the last like month or so is we seem to be getting a whole bunch of new tour-based apps. So Detour is a new one that actually came out from one of the Groupon founders. And this is an app where you can purchase audiobook or audio tours, and you just go on your own. They have a few dozen cities, I think, at this point that they're supporting. We talked with Trapes earlier this year, and that's more of like a tour game than it is a tour. You know, it's more about the game stuff. And then just last week we learned about Z Tours.
It's right. Gamification of tours.
Yeah, and these aren't the only ones. We've heard about a few others that are in the works, and there's a bunch that have already been out there. So I'm thinking that this is going to be the trend for location stuff in 2018 is these tours. You know, the guided tours, the gamified tours. If Groundspeak, Geocaching HQ, had done anything to update Where I Go, I think they'd actually have a real chance at turning that into the product they wanted it to be, a decade ago.
Jesse would agree with you.
Yeah. So might this be the encouragement they need to actually get Where I Go upgraded and usable again?
I think they would take the name, but dump the existing platform.
Start all over.
Absolutely. It's going to have to be Where I Go, V2 or whatever they're going to do. It's going to be an all new ground up approach. They can't really save, I don't think, anything they have, much to the chagrin of people who are Where I Go fans. But
there are fans.
There are fans.
I adore it.
I really think that the tour thing is where we're going to see a lot of investment this year. And I'm hoping that we might see it encourage Where I Go to come back from the dead.
Did you see Team Avaju's response? Where will I go this time?
And when will it end this time?
Nice.
All right. So that's where we're going to wrap it up because we're well over our hour time mark. Thank you so much, Sydney, for showing up again and chatting with us.
Sure, Daryl. I'm so glad you put it that way. Thanks for showing up.
Well,
you're sometimes
you're so here.
Yeah.
You are so here. Thank you for being here.
Hey, at least I've never missed a show that you asked me to be on, like some people have.
Yes. We this is one of the reasons why we thank you for showing up is because and this week I have to confess I've been asleep at the wheel, and I don't think we talked at all since the podcast of hope until just today.
Today, when I was messaging you about this.
Yeah, like an hour before showtime. So
right.
I didn't even have the chance to send you the reminders that normally I would send a guest.
It's fine. I remembered.
Because you're just that into being on our show. It's just, you schedule your whole life around these appearances, right?
Yeah, I've been looking forward to it for weeks, Daryl.
Wow.
Oh, and I'm sure we'll get you on again. But for anyone who hasn't had the chance, you want to tell us about Geocache Talk and where they can find it?
Hey, you got it right that time.
I did.
So yes, Geocache Talk. I am one of 3 hosts. It's on Sunday evenings, 9 p.m. Eastern. GeocacheTalk.com.
Nice. Well, thank you for that.
Now, I do want to remind everyone that there's only a few days left to get your foolish caching stories in for a chance to win one of the magic rival tags, which we've got 4 of them over here. So email your story of a silly mistake you made when caching and what you took away from that experience. And that email address is geogearheads@cachemaniacs.com, and it has to be in by the end of the day on December 19th. Now, that can be an audio file too, and we're more likely to put those on the show since we love hearing them in your own voice. So make sure we get those stories and the lessons, and we'll randomly select from those that we use on the show for one of those 4 remaining rival tags. And if you watch live, we'll include some of that feedback too. So that's geogearheads@cachemaniacs.com by the end of the day on the 19th, or join us live on the 21st for episode 312.
How cool is that? And hey, if you listen to us using iTunes, go ahead and give us a review. Now, we want an honest review. A 5-star review is great, 4-star review, a 3-star review, they're all good. We want an honest review because really that is the currency in iTunes, our reviews. That's what gets our podcast up in the rankings and noticed. So go on there, toss on a review, tell us what you really think. Maybe you shouldn't tell us what you really think. Tell us don't tell us what we want to hear, but be honest.
Yeah, it's been a few months since we've gotten a review on iTunes, so it would be nice. And you know what? I can't believe that Stitcher doesn't do reviews anymore.
Really?
They got rid of
I
the
hadn't noticed that.
Yeah. And a note, we are on Spotify. I don't know that we've actually mentioned that since they actually opened it up. But if you want to check out GeoGearHeads through Spotify, we are available there now too.
For complete Spotification.
Yes. Now, Patron Hangout is going to be on Tuesday. So anyone who's a patron, and we should also note that Patreon is not going to be changing their fee structure. So we have had at least one person, maybe more, who dropped their support who have come back because of that. So thank you for coming back. But that's going to be on December 19th at 6 p.m. Pacific or 9 p.m. Eastern time. So watch Patreon for the link to join the show. However, on the 21st is going to be the Foolish Cachers show. That's going to be with the Waysiders, who most of you probably know through the Going Caching events. Then on the 28th is going to be Randomize LXIV. So what did we decide that was going to be? Levixie?
Levixie?
Yeah, that doesn't sound quite right.
No, the V is at the end.
Yeah.
Lixiv?
Lixiv. Lixiv? Okay. Maybe it's just easier to say 64.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah, that's boring though. Anyways, that's going to be with Scott Burks and Shorty Knits. Then we're going to talk about connections on the 4th with Land Monkey, and that's going to be an interesting one because this is my fault. It comes from many conversations with cachers lately about the physical cable connections, what they mean, and how to actually get this stuff working because people are getting confused with USB-C especially. So we're going to try to turn it into a whole show, and not just USB connections, but connections in general. Then on the 11th is going to be our 315th, and that's going to be trackables once again. And Geo Johnny is going to be on for that one.
Ooh, nice. Until then, make sure you check out the Cachemaniacs website at cachemaniacs.com for more on the GeoGearHeads, including show notes from this and all of our episodes. We love hearing from our listeners. So leave us feedback by emailing geogearheads@cashmaniacs.com or through the many channels of social media. Your support helps keep the Cashmaniacs shows coming. Please consider becoming a patron through the link on our website to support the Cashmaniacs shows. GeoGearHeads is produced by Chris Umfenauer and Daryl Wattenberg. This show's copyright 2017 by Daryl Wattenberg. All rights reserved.
Cash with the Cashmaniacs.